Hey, good people. My name is Minsal Kiwalan. I'm the founder and tech lead at Universal Equations. Today we'll be discussing Scrum, and we're going to be discussing Scrum as an agile framework. We're going to try our best to talk way more about Scrum than we do about Agile. I feel as though Agile can be discussed by itself and on its own. Obviously you can't entirely separate the two because again, we are discussing Scrum as an agile framework. But I feel the agile manifesto and all of those things can be discussed by themselves. But even with that, with agile, with the agile manifesto, we're talking about the philosophy that introduces four values and 12 principles. We won't go into the 12 principles, but four values, I think we can handle that. Which talks about the role of people, the importance of people. And because we're talking about customer collaboration over contract negotiation, some of this stuff is very straightforward. But when you pull forward the four values and look at them at a certain altitude, you get to see the big picture of agile, and hopefully you'll get to see a better picture of Scrum, because that's kind of where we're headed. So we have the one related to customer collaboration. We also have individuals and interactions versus processes and tools. Well, I shouldn't say versus, I just say over processes and tools. Greater emphasis on individuals and interactions. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Now, you have to understand when Agile was introduced, we had more of a waterfall philosophy. So, for those of us can remember that time in software development where you had waterfall, we remember how much of a break this was from the norm. It was in the face of waterfall, and this was a kind of a break from it. I remember the comprehensive documentation, but now we're saying working software over the comprehensive documentation. And also, again, flying in the face of waterfall, we have an emphasis on responding to change as opposed to following a plan, because waterfall obviously was the emphasis was on the plan, and it's very different. It's very different. But again, I think the emergence and evolution of agile, I think that could be a separate conversation. So when we talk about Scrum as an agile framework, I think there's three main aspects I kind of want to get into: the Scrum roles, we have Scrum artifacts, we have Scrum events, right? So with Scrum roles, we identify the Scrum Master, we identify the product owner, we identify the developer, the actual developer on the Scrum team, right? So it kind of simplifies the picture a little bit as far as what a Scrum team looks like. What Scrum does is there is some structure there, but it's kind of a semi-structure, because Agile is about flexibility. That's one of the emphases of Agile is the flexibility that it gives to the organization or team to do what it needs to do to respond to changes and to get more interaction, to get more involvement amongst the team and the customer. Right, so it gives you some flexibility there, but we do need structure. We can't be completely structureless, and according to Scrum, it's better not to be completely structureless. It's better to have some structure, right? And Scrum provides that. So again, we have the Scrum Master, which is kind of a coach of the team. You have a product owner who this product order responsibility, we'll get into. Actually, we probably should get into that later. Some of the product owner's responsibilities. But as the name suggests, if you're developing a product, then the product owner is the one in terms of the overarching requirements of that product that's the responsibility of the product owner. And I was in interacting with the customer, figuring out what the emphasis is, right? As far as what the product should do. And I think it's good to point out that when we're talking about Scrum teams and we're talking about what this Scrum team is trying to accomplish, and we've mentioned it before, we're not trying to create a minimum viable product. You know, usually that's already been created. What we're trying to do is maximize the customer experience via the features of the product, right? So we're trying to maximize features, not have a minimum viable product. And we're kind of doing the opposite by maximizing those features, prioritizing and organizing via sprint and via release, right? So the product owner is going to play a big role. Is going to play a big role in that. Let's even we get into the backlog, right? So that segues us into the Scrum artifacts, which is the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increments, right? Product backlog, that is every single feature that will go into building that product, theoretically would have at some point existed in the product backlog, right? The product owner is his or her responsibility. He or she is the steward of this product backlog, and usually features in Scrum are written in user story formats, which means that they are written in a narrative form from the perspective of the user, right? As a so-and-so, I should be able to such and such for the benefit of such and such. And there's slight variations of the user story format. So that's Scrum, that's the backlog. These are the backlog items. You have features, you have defects. There's number of other things can go into this backlog. Technical debt, which is could probably be a slightly different conversation, because what the technical debt is just those things that accumulate, just like financial debt, those things that accumulate over time. Let's say upgrades. Let's say that's technical debt, an upgrade. So we know that the longer it takes to upgrade, maybe it's a platform that you're using, or some other part of the application that may not be considered a feature, but something that can, if not dealt with, like I said, as an upgrade, could cause issues over time, because ultimately someone's going to have to go in and, for example, let's say there's a version that's no longer going to be supported, in like a year, and you want to upgrade from that version to the newer version, so you have the benefit of having the support of the newer version. So obviously, if you keep holding off on that, then ultimately that's tech debt. It's going to take even more time. The longer you wait, the more time it's going to be to deal with the issue. But about all of those types of things, just giving you a picture of what's going into that product backlog. Then you have the sprint backlog, right? So what's a sprint, right? So notice I didn't say what a Scrum was. There's no fancy acronym for that. Scrum, I mean, people that are into the rugby, same word, but I honestly don't know the connection between the Scrum word and the actual Scrum within the context of this framework. So I'll let y'all Google that. I don't know. All right. But what is a sprint? So a sprint is one of the Scrum events, right? You have a sprint. You have daily Scrum meetings. You have a sprint review. You have a sprint retrospective. These are some of the you have sprint planning. So these are some of the Scrum events. Now, a sprint is just now all the other events that I mentioned take place within the sprint, right? You can probably get that sprint planning takes place before at the beginning of the sprint. That's kind of sort of the time where items within the product backlog are making their way into the sprint backlog, right? They are deemed ready to come into the sprint, which means that a developer can see that, understand what needs to be done, and do it within the length of that sprint, which could be 2 weeks typical time. Some say 3 weeks. I mean, there's some flexibility there. Some will even say a month, but there's flexibility there. But usually it's going to be 2 weeks. Going to be 2 weeks. Or there may be a situation where there may be a lot of holidays within a particular sprint, so they may extend it to 3 weeks for that reason. But there's definitely flexibility there. So within that sprint, you can have a sprint planning meeting where you're planning on what you're going to do during the sprint. There may be some kind of what we call black backlog grooming or backlog refinement. That's where if there's any questions about a particular feature or something that can be done, then those questions, should be answered there. So that item, that feature, or that fix, whatever that item is, that work item is, can be deemed ready. That means a developer can pull it from the backlog and start working on it, right? So we got sprint planning. We have the daily Scrum meetings. These meetings are around 50 minutes. Some may drag on to 30. But I remember, we called them stand-ups because we would actually stand up during the meetings, and we would have our big screen monitor with whether it's Jira or whatever tool that you're using. So we did actually stand up at one time. Some teams still do that. They still stand up because the whole idea is if you have to sit down, the meeting is too long. You know what I mean? So the meeting should be about 15 minutes. What did I do yesterday? What do I plan to do today? And what are potential, what we call blockers, what are potential challenges or obstacles that you may see yourself running into? And ideally, there may be someone else on that team that can, or a group that can maybe help you. We say take it offline. And so we may, after the meeting is over, we may have a meeting offline where we can work through a particular blocker that you may have to get you unblocked. So we have those things. What else am I missing? The retrospective. Retrospective takes place at the end. That's when the team talks about what's been done well, things that we should keep doing, things that we may need to stop doing, all of that. So that's kind of a reflection on the sprint. And there's some because the idea of agile in general, going back to this as a as a agile framework, continuous improvement. So retrospective gives the opportunity to figure out where things can improve moving forward, right? So then we have the sprint review. I think I have all of them. Sprint planning, we say the daily Scrum meeting, sprint review. We have the sprint retrospective, and obviously the sprint itself. But the sprint review, a lot of times, that's where everyone talks about what they completed. And there may even be a demo to stakeholders. It's very possible. You may have a software. There's a number of softwares that allow you to demo certain features, whether if you're going through a testing suite or maybe it's some UI feature. I mean, it's just some kind of test automation or some way of demoing what you've done so that the stakeholder can get some idea as to the progress. And again, this is very much contrasted with something like the waterfall, which again, this is something that we would talk about a lot more of in a conversation about Agile. And that is when we're talking about the customer being empowered in that at the end of every sprint, this stakeholder can see the progress as opposed to waiting 3 to 6 months to seeing the progress. You know what I mean? Who knows what's going on between that time frame, right? So it's just a different way of thinking, and it's most people would say it's a better way of thinking in terms of how to manage your projects, in terms of how developers should be working, how they should be thinking in the lines of products and when they're creating these products. So I think we have it all. I think we have the Scrum roles, like we said, developers. We have the product owner, the Scrum Master. Hopefully, you got a pretty better idea of what these folks do within the team. Which the Scrum team generally is like 8 to 10 people, but flexibility, that's key. So we have the Scrum artifacts, the product backlog, right? That's the all-encompassing backlog of the sprint backlog that we associate with a particular sprint. And we have the increments, which I don't think I talked about. An increment is just the goal, the goal that's accomplished at the end of the sprint. Just like you can increment a version, going from version 3.1.1 to 3.1.2, that is, an increment that theoretically should be ready to be released into hopefully production. So that's another one of the sprint artifacts. And then we have the Scrum artifacts. I mean, the Scrum events, with the sprint being the main one, because all the other events take place in the sprint. You have the daily Scrum meetings, you have the sprint review, you have the sprint retrospective, and you have the sprint planning. Those four that take place within the sprint. So I think we've talked about it all. Again, thank you for your attention. These are very important concepts that will definitely help you throughout your career as either an IT project manager, a software developer, etc. Ideas have been in place a very long time. And whether you use Jira, Product Plan, Asana, any of those tools that kind of enable you to do some of this stuff, it's a big deal. I mean, it could be the difference between your team or organization being competitive as a producer of software, and it doesn't always have to be software either. But when it comes to some quote unquote product that needs to be released, it could be the difference between you being competitive as far as a product that has a maximal amount of customer value added features, or not. So that's a big deal. But anyhow, click the like button. That'll definitely help me out to keep this content going, and or click subscribe to this YouTube channel. But anyhow, we'll talk to you all later. Peace.